Hey, Texas Study students. This is Coach Science, welcoming you back to another one of our video lessons. Today's video lesson is Chapter 8.3 and Life in Colonial Texas. Make sure that you fill in the blanks as we go through today's video. Now, as we talked about in Chapters 8.2, Stephen F. Austin had brought the old 300, and many other empresarios had gotten land grants to come to Texas, right? Now, as these people that were living in the United States were coming over to Texas, you could see that they had left signs like these two that we see here saying GTT, Gone to Texas. Now, these signs were a common sign on abandoned cabins across the southern United States as people were leaving their homes, leaving that part of the United States, and moving to Texas. Now, they had many reasons for Texas settlers coming over here, right? Reasons for the settlers moving here. One of the first ones was seeking adventure. Now, if we can see here, we see the settlers, right? Now, remember, if you remember, these Anglo-American settlers came from Europe, in the countries of Europe, and seeking adventure to come to the eastern part of the United States and to settle there, right? But that wasn't it. They wanted to continue to grow and have a big, greater adventure and come over into Texas. Now, another one of the problems was that number two, as we see there, escape from problems in the U.S., right? And if we can circle right there, problems. One of the many problems that they had while they were in the U.S., they accumulated large debt. Right there. Large debt. They owed lots of money to a lot of different people. So they wanted to escape with that by moving over here to Texas. The final and third reason why they moved to Texas was that was plentiful and a lot of cheap land that they could afford here in Texas. Now, with land being so cheap, here's what Texas land would look like. Now, land back in the United States cost $1.25 per acre. You're probably thinking, $1.25? Coach, that's nothing. I buy chips and snacks at lunch, way worth more than that. And you're probably right. But back then, $1.25 was a lot of money, and not a lot of people had that. Now, $1.25, was much more than what most Americans in that time could actually afford. Now, on the contrary, Texas land sold for 12.5 cents per acre and could be paid over several years. You didn't have to pay up front. So, with the $1.25 that you were using to buy an acre in the U.S., you could buy 12 acres here in Texas. That is why so many people came to Texas. Now, if you remember when we worked on our land distribution worksheet a couple of days ago, you remember that each family would receive a certain amount of land per acre, right? Now, although many African American slaves were brought to Texas by southern U.S. settlers, however, it did not make sense because slavery was prohibited in Mexico when the Constitution of 1824 was written, and this would later pose a big problem. But people were still bringing their slaves into Texas. Now, after 1829, slavery was officially abolished in Mexico, but the law was not enforced. Now, since Texas colonists were so far away, right, here's Mexico City, the capital, and Texas being there, colonists were so far away, at such a distance from Mexico City, that the government could not control these new settlers. They couldn't watch over them to see if they were actually following slavery. They couldn't watch over them to see if they were actually practicing Catholicism, or they couldn't watch over them to see if they were actually colonists of good and moral character. There was too many new colonists and not enough government control. Now, the colonial diet was a very different diet than what we eat today. There's no Chick-fil-A back then, right? So, corn was the main food source for them. They also depended greatly on fishing and hunting, right? They also gathered and ate a lot of berries and nuts. As we can see here, salt, sugar, and flour was another one of their food choices to be able to survive. Now that we've mentioned their diet, we're also going to mention their colonial homes. They lived in a one-room log cabin, as we can see here in this picture, right? Now, their mattresses were made of corn husks, the things that are the coverings for tamales, right? That's a corn husk. That's what they use for their mattresses. Now, the floor, as we can see there, was the bare ground. They didn't have tile, they didn't have anything else, they didn't have real wood, no. They used the bare floor as their ground. And the furniture that they used would be carved from trees and logs that they would eventually have to cut down, either for firewood or for furniture. Now, if you remember, one of the requirements for them to move to Texas was so that they could be of Catholic religion, right? That's one of the things that they would require, right? Mexican officials. But with Mexican government so far away, Texas colonists worshipped as they pleased, right? Now, the Protestants preached freely and established churches. Now, just to give you a quick breakdown of this, now Christianity was the main focus, right? And Catholicism and Protestants are two different ends of the spectrum of Christianity and how they worshipped, right? Now, with Mexico being so far away, many of these new people coming to Texas decided to openly follow their own religion that they worshipped back in the United States. Now, with that, colonists also faced many challenges. One of the challenges was disease and the very few trained doctors that there were. Coming to the new land, there was many new diseases, new areas that they had to get used to. So disease was one of the main causes. A second cause was the conflict with the natives. As we can see here, we see an Indian raid on a home just living on the outskirts of a town or just living on the land that they've acquired, right? These Indians would attack and leave suddenly, right? So with that, Stephen F. Austin formed militias to prevent native raids, right? These militias would eventually evolve into the present day Texas Rangers. Now, Texas also what's going on was the tensions between Mexican government and the colonists. The colonists, remember, were doing whatever they wanted, and Mexico did not have enough government supervision to be able to watch all of them. So this increased the tensions between colonial people and Mexican government. Now we're going to move into part 2 of our chapter 8.3 section 3. And we're going to talk about German immigration. Here we see a picture of Germany, the country, on the European map. Now, German immigration and German settlers in Texas began in the year 1831 with a man named Friedrich Ernst, right? This later became known as the father of German immigration to Texas. Now, in this map, in the red, we see where the German population is. It's mostly here in Central and East Texas, right? Now, as well, we see the green areas, right? Now, the green means is where the largest population of German immigrants were. Now, from 1831 to 1845, thousands of Germans settled in Central Texas in cities like New Braunfels, where many of you know that Schlitterbahn is, and Fredericksburg, Texas. Now, German Hill Country. A central part of the Texas Hill Country, right, in Central Texas, is still called the German Hill Country because of their German food, the family customs, and the architecture and language that still remain to this day in Central Texas. Here we see a picture and a depiction of how the Germans would build things coming from Germany and implement them here to their everyday life in Texas. Next, we're going to talk about French immigration. Here is the country of France in red on the European map. Now, French immigrants came to Texas in small groups or singly by themselves until the 1840s. Now, after that, a man named Henri Castro brought 2,134 French colonists to establish Texas, right, in Texas, and a colony named Castroville. Right, and here we see a depiction of a picture of Castroville, which is a city still there to this day, west of San Antonio. Next, we're going to be talking about Swiss immigration. Here is the country of Switzerland, which is kind of small there on the European map. Now, the Swiss began immigrating to Texas in the year 1821, the same year that Mexico had won its independence from Spain. Now, many of the Swiss families that came settled in North Texas communities. Now, many of the careers that they had were farming, ranching, banking, and dairy, and those same skills that they had in Europe, they brought them and implemented them to Texas. Next, we're going to be talking about Swedish immigration, right? And this country in orange right here, and that is the country of Sweden. Now, the first Swedish settler was a 22-year-old named S.M. Svensson, and see right here in this picture, this is actually Mr. Svensson himself. Now, he arrived in what is now present-day Houston in 1836 and made a fortune, or became very rich, in the business of cotton. And later on, we're going to find out how important cotton was to Texas, right, and to the economy. Now, he set off a stream of immigration to Texas. That means he was the one that began a huge migration to Texas. Now, at this time, Sweden was very poor, overpopulated, that means way too many people, and had very little food as a country. Now, seeing how things bad were in Sweden, Svensson offered free passage to anyone who would work for him for 1 year, right? And this continued for over 60 years. Now, like I had said earlier, things in Sweden were really bad, so people took up his offer to go over there and work for him for 1 year. Now, this was not slavery. This was called indentured servant. This means that this person would work, yes, for free, but ultimately that they did not or were not tied down to him forever. They were only tied down to him for 1 year. After that 1 year, that person was free to go. He was not a slave. An indentured servant, this is the system that Svensson would use to bring people to be able to get a new life, or a chance at a new life. Next, we're going to talk about Polish immigration. Now, here you see Poland in the country in red on this European map. Now, the first organized group of Polish immigrants to America landed in Galveston in the year 1854. Now, many of these immigrants were farmers and businessmen, and they brought these particular skills to Texas and used them while they moved here to this new country. Now, the Polish immigration continued after the Civil War, mostly to East Central Texas. We'll be discussing the Civil War on a later date. Now, these immigrants were escaping poverty, political and cultural and religious hardships they were facing in Poland. Now, Houston held the largest concentration of Polish immigrants, and here in this picture we see Polish, not immigrants, but Polish customs and things that they do here in the United States, and cultural customs and religious things as they shown here in this picture today. The next thing we're going to be talking about is Irish immigration. And here we have the country of Ireland in red on the European map. Irish immigration mostly settled in cities of San Patricio and Refugio. Now, San Patricio can be translated to Saint Patrick, right? And a lot of people know about the Saint Patrick and how that is celebrated by the Irish. Now, they fled to Texas here because of the potato famine of the mid-1850s. Now, also known as the potato blight. Blight, we'll put that right there. Blight. Now, over 1 million people died because of what was happening in Ireland because of these potatoes, and over 1 million people fled to the United States and moved to Texas, right? Now, the McMullen and McGloin group of colonists set up colonial areas north and west of modern-day Corpus Christi and brought in these Irish families. And lastly, we'll be talking about Czech immigration. And the Czech Republic is this little country right here on in red on the European map. Now, most of the Czech immigrants had been farmers in Europe and settled in the coastal plains of Texas. Now, the Czechs also played a major part in the Texas cotton industry. Here we see in the picture a family of Czech immigrants in their cotton farm here in Texas. Now, throughout this chapter 8.3 section, we've been able to see how Anglo-Americans and their immigration has been a huge part to not only the development of Texas, but the development of the Texas economy and many of the industries that Texas will be known for. Now, this completes our video lesson on chapter 8.3 in Life in Colonial Texas. This is Coach Signs signing out.